he begins to formulate a secret plan, an opportunity to redeem himself, with the help of a skill he learnt many years before. Hess is an experienced pilot. He flew biplanes in the First World War. Now, he familiarizes himself with the prototype of the latest Messerschmitt, taking it on flights under the guise of testing its capability. The 110 is usually crewed by 2 pilots, but Hess has it modified so he can fly solo. And he has extra fuel tanks fitted to increase its range. Hess knows that Hitler is preparing to invade Russia, and he recognizes that Germany cannot fight a long war on 2 fronts. His outlandish plan is to go behind the Führer's back, fly to Britain, and try to meet an influential contact who, he hopes, will introduce him to Winston Churchill. The aim? To persuade the British to sue for peace.
He knew if he would be able to make peace with Britain, that would definitely please Hitler. Here, the Führer, I bring you the peace with Britain. This would also, of course, immediately overnight meant that he would make it back in the inner circle again.
The person Hess hopes will act as a go-between is someone he met 5 years earlier when the Olympic Games were held in Germany. Behind the scenes, the Nazi leaders laid on lavish parties for foreign dignitaries, and it's then that Hess is thought to have been introduced to a well-known Scottish aristocrat.
It's at one of these banquets where it is said that he met the Duke of Hamilton, and there they forged some sort of connection that Hess would use in the future.
Like Hess, the Duke of Hamilton was a keen pilot. In fact, he was something of a hero in the aviation world, after being the first person to fly a biplane over Mount Everest. To Hess, this dashing adventurer with a fancy title must have come across as being at the heart of the British establishment. Someone very well connected, who probably mixed with royalty, and perhaps even had a direct line to the British leadership. Now, 5 years on, Hess plans to renew that acquaintance. He'll fly to the Duke of Hamilton's estate in Scotland and ask him for an introduction to Churchill.
So, emboldened by all these sort of ideas of, fate and Nostradamus and astrology, Hess decides that he's got one last card he can play, and if he plays it well, he will have the eternal gratitude of not only his beloved Führer, but also of the German people.
At the beginning of May, Hess visits the Führer in the Reich Chancellery. It is to be their last meeting. Hess never said what they talked about that day, a fact that would give rise to a conspiracy theory that maybe Hitler was in on the plan. But does it stand up to scrutiny?
There's no evidence whatsoever that Hitler knew about Hess' plans, and all evidence we have is very clear that Hitler was totally surprised by that step. So, to me, it's absolutely clear Hitler did not know that Hess was planning to fly to Scotland and try to negotiate a peace with Britain.
6 days after that meeting, the most bizarre episode of the Second World War starts to unfold. Rudolf Hess explains his intentions in a letter to Hitler. He then leaves home, telling his wife Ilse he will return in a couple of days.
On the 10th of May, Hess plays his last card. It's the card played by a desperate man.
Hess drives to the aerodrome. He tells his adjutant to deliver his letter to Hitler by hand the following day. There's no turning back now. Hess's route takes him across Germany and over the North Sea towards Scotland. He navigates right into enemy airspace and reaches his planned destination south of Glasgow. But in the fading light, he cannot see anywhere to land. He decides he has no alternative. He'll bail out.
I mean, it really is absolutely extraordinary. You think about this, he's never even done a parachute jump before. This is the deputy leader of the Nazi Party on a lone mission in a Messerschmitt 110, flying over Scotland to a place that he doesn't know at all, and then parachuting out for the very, very first time. The whole thing is, frankly, you couldn't make it up.
But despite all the dangers, Hess lands safely.
This is a near miracle that he's managed to do this, and maybe when he lands, he feels he survived this epic flight and this epic parachute drop, and yet he's still alive. He must feel that, well, maybe Providence is making this go well.
On hearing the plane crash, a farm worker goes out to investigate and comes face to face with the Deputy Führer. "I am a German," the well-spoken intruder announces, "and I have an important message for the Duke of Hamilton." Then the local Home Guard arrives on the scene.
And at this point, it all gets rather farcical.
What happens next is like something out of a sort of one of those old-fashioned British comedies.
The farmer then takes him off to his house, gives him a cup of tea in time-honoured British fashion.
And that's how we do things in Britain. We always give people a cup of tea, even if they are the second most senior Nazi.
But the warm welcome will be short-lived.
Eventually, he's taken off to a barracks where he's held, and then the real trouble starts for him.
The prisoner is positively identified as the enemy's deputy leader. This is not the reception he had in mind.
Hess is suffering from a delusion of viewing the British political system still almost in a feudal mindset, as a system in which dukes and barons and so on still have tremendous political influence. In truth, they don't.
He believes he'll be sent straight down by special car to go and dine with Winston Churchill, where they'll have top-level discussions. It's just so far from a practical idea, and it's a measure of how detached Hess has come from reality.
That same weekend, Adolf Hitler is taking a relaxing break at his Bavarian retreat, the Berghof. On the Sunday morning, around the same time as Hess is identified in Scotland, his adjutant arrives with a most important letter for the Führer.
My Führer, when you receive this letter, I shall be in England. You can imagine that the decision to take this step was not easy for me.
Hess says, I've done this for the sake of your good self, mein Führer, and for the sake of Germany. War with Britain is not serving our interests. We must make peace.
And if, my Führer, this project, which I admit has but very little chance of success, ends in failure and the fates decide against me, this can have no detrimental results for you or Germany. It will always be possible for you to deny all responsibility. Simply say, I am crazy.
High up in the Obersalzberg, up this mountain, there was a maelstrom going on. At the heart of it was Hitler, incandescent with rage that his most trusted, loyal comrade from all those years back had just got off in a plane in the middle of the night and flown off without telling him.
The principals are summoned. Bormann has no answers to Hitler's furious questions. How could Hess have flown off without anyone knowing? Why didn't anyone stop him? He's in a very delicate position, being still nominally Hess's deputy. Will he be tainted by association to the traitor? The control freak has lost control. So what happens now?
Within the inner circle, the question arises, how are we going to present this to the public? So Martin Bormann contacts Joseph Goebbels, and he replies, there are some situations where propaganda hasn't got the answer, and this is one of them. Rudolf Hess has lost the plot.
In his diary, Goebbels sums up the mood inside the inner circle.
The entire affair is thoroughly confused at the moment. A hard, almost unbearable blow. The Führer is quite shattered. What a sight in the world's eyes. The Führer's deputy, a mentally disturbed man. Dreadful and unthinkable. Now we shall have to grit our teeth.
Goebbels does precisely as Hess suggested. His radio stations report that Hess is mad.
The letter he left unfortunately shows in his confusion the evidence of a mental derangement, which leads us to fear that party member Hess has fallen victim to a delusion.
The broadcast goes on to suggest that the Deputy Führer has most probably crashed or met with an accident. And that, as far as the stunned entourage around Hitler is concerned, is the end of the matter. Hess becomes a non-person. He is never to be mentioned in public again. But it leaves an uncomfortable question in the mind of many Germans, but a question which no one dares voice. If Hess was deranged, how come he was still in place as the Führer's deputy? Precisely 4 hours after the German radio bulletin, the BBC broadcasts this astonishing announcement.
Here is the news from London. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, has flown from Germany and landed in Scotland by parachute.
The newsreels gloat over this bizarre turn of events. Hess's unexpected arrival in Scotland is a moment of light relief during the dark days of the Blitz.
His name is David McLean. He works on a farm not far from Glasgow. He saw Rudolf Hess coming down in the darkness by parachute.
Yes, I'm the man that captured Rudolf Hess.
The British treat it as one big sort of laugh.
I went over to the farm and the only weapon I could find was a pitchfork.
What is this all about? This can't be real.
The man refused tea and would only have a drink of water.
Churchill doesn't take any notice of it. It's treated in the British press like one big laugh. What is going on here?
Rudolf Hess may have thought he would be invited to have tea with Churchill, but instead, he's taken off to the Tower of London. The wisest course of action, Hess tells his interrogators, would be for Britain to seize this chance to make peace with Hitler and form an alliance against Soviet Russia. And if king and country would just allow Nazi Germany a free rein in continental Europe, Britain and its empire will be left untouched. The interrogators can't work out if Hess is deluded or plain mad. And his arrival in Britain had coincided with one of the worst air raids of the Blitz, in which 1,200 people had been killed. Winston Churchill is in no mood to talk peace.
So the whole thing has been an absolute catastrophe from any which way you look at it, whether you be Hess, whether you be Hitler, or whether you be Goebbels or anyone in Nazi Germany, frankly.
Back at the Berghof, Bormann's keen to fill the new vacancy, and so immediately moves to distance himself from his former boss. He has Hess's wife, Ilse, interrogated and threatened with eviction from the family home. But she appeals to Eva Braun, and Hitler accepts she was not in on the plan. In happier days, Bormann had named two of his children, Rudolf and Ilse, after their godparents. Now he promptly changes their names by court order. Within days, having ridden the storm, Bormann's loyalty is rewarded. Hitler abolishes the post of Deputy Führer, and despite strong objections from both Goering and Goebbels, appoints Bormann as head of the Chancellery, his closest aide and formal gatekeeper. With fox-like cunning, the backroom operator has finally reached the pinnacle of his power, at the heart of the injustice, violence, and terror of the Third Reich.
You can imagine him thinking, now I've made it, and Hess is yesterday's man, you know. I've got all this in front of me. Sitting down, putting his feet up perhaps, putting an ashtray on the table so he could smoke. You can imagine that for Bormann this is a unique moment.
Back in Britain, Hess is moved to a safe house outside London.
Hess is being held captive, and he's feeling that he must have failed. He's feeling lonely, and more lonely than he did in the Third Reich. And he must be aware of the fact that really his future's deeply uncertain, and he knows he must be being vilified by not only the inner circle back home, but also in the world at large. He's been written off.
Hess is in the depths of despair. To him, there's only one way out.
He reaches his lowest ebb and tries to commit suicide by throwing himself over the banister down into the hall of the building.
But Hess fails again.
He breaks his leg on landing, is in tremendous pain, and that must have been his lowest moment. Not only had he failed in his mission, but he'd also failed to take his own life.
Rudolf Hess will remain behind bars for the rest of his life. He pours his heart out in Red Cross letters to his family and friends.
Dear all, you can imagine how I am thinking of you. My thoughts are no less with the Führer and with the whole nation. Someday I shall return home. I am looking forward to it with pleasure. True, I achieved nothing. I was not able to stop the madness of the war and could not prevent what I saw coming. But it makes me happy to think that I tried.
And on one level, that is, a pretty sympathetic thing to have written. It looks like a man who desired peace rather than war, and it looks like that he was probably, of the inner circle, the least martial of the lot. And yet we mustn't be too kind to Hess. He was a man who propagated and helped to bring to power one of the most evil regimes the world has ever seen.